Dragon's Dogma's classic medieval setting naturally extends to the characters and enemies you'll encounter throughout it. You'll feel very familiar with everything you see if you've ever seen a medieval setting before this. Literally the first enemies you see are goblins and a dragon. Then there are harpies, wolves and a chimera, all in an unspecified crumbling castle. Proper fantasy. Later on, you'll get bandits, cyclopses, griffins, and so on. Most of the enemies in this game are completely faithful depictions of classic European myths, and just whacking them all into a world together like this makes it all feel so cohesive. If it was a combination of classic monsters and unique designs, it might feel a bit like the game doesn't know what to do with itself. No shade to Final Fantasy, of course. But with the internal consistency on display here, it offers a truly believable world, which allows the player to become more immersed as a result. And the same goes for the characters themselves. Again, classic archetypes and positions. Starting from your little fishing village, nobody's really rich here, but everyone seems happy and there's a strong friendly community despite the whole dragon thing. There are encampments of royal soldiers sworn to serve their posts, though their hearts are often not in it. Merchants and common folk walk the same roads as you, sometimes finding themselves under attack from nomadic bandits, goblins or other monsters on their travels. I wonder, how could the current emotional climate of the world be summed up? Maybe a cloud? Everyone seems on edge, you could say. I don't know, maybe there's some other way to say it.
A cloud of unease hangs over the land these days.
A cloud of unease hangs over the land these days.
Times are hard indeed.
A cloud of unease hangs over the land these days.
Times are hard indeed.
A cloud of unease hangs over the land these days.
A cloud of unease hangs over the land these days.
Times are hard indeed.
A cloud of unease hangs over the land these days.
A cloud of unease hangs over the land these days.
Ah! Excellent! Grand Soren, the Great Walled Capital, houses a few drastically different social classes within one city, from the unlimited wealth of the Duke and his associates down to those in the slums who aren't even able to find the most basic of incomes, and are dehumanized daily by living alongside sewer rats. It's like a real city. There's even a housing crisis affecting such a huge number of people that supposedly no quick solution can pull any of them out of abject poverty, all while the corporate and governmental gluttons causing all the problems for the poor live just upstairs and preside over a non-functioning democracy. There are inns, taverns, smiths, sex workers, farmers, nuns, knights, eccentric followers of storied sorcerers. You get the picture. The variety of characters you'll meet in your time on the Grantis Peninsula is great, and they all serve to strengthen the setting that much more. There were a couple of characters who stood out to me for how they alluded to the potential for a larger world. So Mercedes and Aldous. Mercedes is a knight you meet really early in the game, and who you see around the castle sometimes, and it turns out she was actually sent by her father as a gesture of allegiance to Grancis. She's a nobility of a nearby region, and when things get dire, eventually she says she'll bring back some help from her homeland. This plot point doesn't really go anywhere, but it suggested to me that there was initially planned to be more of a grand quest before the dragon became available to fight. Aldous then is one of the more important quest givers in the game, since his quests come directly from the Duke. At one point he receives a message that seems to suggest that you'll be travelling to a new area, but you don't. I like these two, though the story segments they start to set up unfortunately leave the later parts of the game feeling a little bit rushed in terms of execution. It's characters like this who give us a slight insight into how much bigger the game could have been if it had had a little bit more development. Pawns are interesting. They have a story, I think, so yet again I'll put a pin in that to maybe come back to in the story video. They appear to be obedient, human-like characters who unquestioningly go on adventures with you and give incredible insights.
Different countries, cities, people. Intriguing.
'Tis not defeat to flee from battle, master. 'Tis survival. Keep watch on your surroundings.
This road is frequented by peddlers.
Best we
The
bought
roads
two
are
of
comparatively
very
suffer
safe
great damage if
and
struck
best
without
of
your
our
weapons
lives.
drawn.
If you aim to
One-eyed
gather
giant
materials,
lurks outside.
best you searched by day. Keep
When
vigilant.
venturing into new territory,
Tis always best we see
you
our
went by
foes ere
daylight.
they
I
see
fear
us.
something
Tis not defeat to flee from battle, master. Tis
The
survival.
roads are
catch foes
comparatively
High
unaware.
elevations
safe and
make
free of
fine
pests.
watchtowers.
What I really like about them though is how they came to be. Pawns were made as a way to get around the problem posed by multiplayer in practice. Real people are difficult in that most of them have lives. It's an unfortunate reality that those of us who have an insurmountable fear of touching grass still need to come to terms with, but thanks to kind people like Hideaki Itsuno,
そういういろいろがあって、オンラインゲームで遊びたいんだけども、そういう面倒くさい思いとか気を使ったりとかしたくないな。でそれをなんとかうまくする方ないかなっていうアイデアを出してる時期がありまして、その2つの友達と遊んでるような気分で遊べるという仕組みと、
We can continue living partly in a magical fantasy land, with fake people who join us in otherwise solo quests, touching fictional grass. This grass is better because it's made of polygons rather than cells. Anyway, pawns form a core part of what Dragon's Dogma is. It's like playing in a party somewhere in between that of a solo JRPG and an MMO. They allow enemy encounters to be scaled and designed around multiplayer scenarios, while you also don't need to worry about the immersion-breaking nature of other people's lives. When you're playing with pawns at your side, you're in Grancis. When you're playing with a party of your friends in a Monster Hunter lobby, you're sitting at a screen playing a game. Now for a moment I'd like to touch on an interpretation of pawns from an ethical standpoint, and that is the unfortunate yet unavoidable description of pawns as a slave or servant race, which is a really uncomfortable aspect of them that occasionally pops into my head. Before I talk about that though, I'd like to preface this bit with my concrete belief that there isn't such thing as a slave race in the real world. This should hopefully be a pretty uncontroversial stance, but this is the internet. Anyway, it would be easier to brush off this reading as baseless and dramatic if pawns were actually other arisen on the same quest as you, or if there were simply other people who insisted on joining you in your journey. But they're not. They're described as being from the Rift, though nobody seems to know exactly what that means for their history. And because they have a different background to the other people in the world, along with them being generally mysterious and kind of needing someone to follow around everywhere, they experience a lot of mistrust and prejudice from some people. That also seems to be something they're bringing back in the sequel as well. I feel like it would be easier to just accept pawns as obedient allies if that's what they were in gameplay alone, but since they're treated differently to other people, it stands out as something you're meant to think about. Maybe we're meant to be uncomfortable about bringing pawns on our quest, even though it's the pawns alone who tell us they're there to aid on that quest. Maybe the developers wanted us to do a moral double take and make us contemplate whether or not we're justifying a form of slavery when we tell ourselves it's fine to command people who pretty much can't refuse us. The ethical implications of pawns are really uncomfortable, and add a strange unease to the concept of artificial companions. Add to that the fact that pawns are the only characters who can be brought back from death after running out of health without the use of a wakestone item. Again, I'm certain that it's because of their role as non-player members of your party that they're like this, because having NPC allies die without any chance to save them would be needlessly brutal, and you could say that it's only the touch of the Arisen that can revive them. But in addition to the other dehumanizing aspects of their characterization, it just doesn't feel right. It's like the developers are saying these characters are less substantial life forms than humans, which has awful implications. And while we're on the topic of pawns, I'd like to talk about Celine. She offers an insight into the life of a pawn after the demise of their arisen master. Being both a witch and a pawn, Celine is subject to a witch hunt at one point, where some people from Gran Soren descend on the Witchwood to kill her because they've been led to believe that she summoned the dragon. As was the case with real witch hunts, the women in question never did anything wrong to attract the ire of these people, but they want someone to blame for something, so Celine is an easy target for shamelessly othering an already persecuted person. After dispersing the mob outside her humble little hut and dealing with the golem that's just woken up, you can find out about her history and her Gran. It seems the woman she calls Gran, Sophia, was her Arisen and died at some point, leaving Celine aimless and alone. With your help, she's able to move on and live in Cassidus, joining a friendly community and becoming human. Now this is a pawn-centric message about humanity that I can get behind. Let's forget about the one I was talking about a minute ago, with them being presented to us as willingly enslaved subhumans. I much prefer the idea of them being socially and emotionally immature like children and needing time in a new environment after separating from a mentor figure in order to grow as individuals. The game seems to suggest that a fulfilling life can be lived after the death of a pawn's arisen, which is surprisingly profound for a game that can feel quite silly at times. I started writing this video without a plan for where it would go. What I believe the Arisen represents will become clearer in the story video. What I didn't expect was for the pawns to factor into that reading. Pawns can be seen like children, undeveloped for a while, but eventually able to become their own people after the Arisen runs out of time. When they're forced into independence, they might try to carry on living as they did before, following in the footsteps of their former master. Sometimes that might work, but for other pawns it might feel empty inside. With the gaping void left within them by their Arisen, it becomes hard to find direction for themselves, and it's okay for them to accept help from others who offer it. Maybe this is another reason why the natural servant interpretation bothers me so much. I hate the thought of children being treated as simply inferior in every way to any given adult, only worth keeping around so they can unquestioningly do the bidding of their parents. And the emptiness in a pawn resulting from the disconnect between their life's trajectory and their Arisen's nature is a tragic reality paralleled in real life with so many relationships. Maybe the pawn will see the world from a fresh perspective, and one that may well be a more grounded or common point of view than the Arisen's. After all, the Arisen is recognised across the land as a hero to save us all. The pawns are just along for the ride, so they never get venerated to the same degree. It might be easy for the Arisen to lose touch with their roots as a regular person and become numb to the world they live in, shifting their opinions and mindset about everyone in their life and society as a whole without realising it. They might become out of touch and blame the world or lone pawns rather than themselves for having views that conflict with what is generally accepted as the right outlook within the circles they're used to mixing in. So, with Dragon's Dogma being one of, in my opinion, the strongest pieces of classical Western fantasy in the genre, it somehow manages to present deeply profound messages about humanity by way of the mechanics of one of its standout gameplay systems. From how pawns have been talked about by the director, it seems like they might have followed a similar developmental arc to GLaDOS from Portal. And by that I mean that they were created from a mechanical standpoint first and foremost, characterised in a later stage of development, and now are arguably more recognisable for their character than for their mechanical uses. The pawns were first implemented as a convenient replacement for real multiplayer, to create a seamless experience for the game, but at least from my interpretation of them, they've ended up reflecting one of the most universal experiences of humanity, the relationship between parent and child, with a number of its flaws and challenges. I won't go into much detail about most of the characters, since I think it would get quite tedious to just run through every single person with a unique dialogue and try to delve into their characters. There are just too many, and not enough of them have substantial enough personalities to justify me doing that. And as for the Beloved, well, I kind of just see that as a fairly regular romance system. It's nice that it comes in at the end of the game, though I feel like it would be more impactful if the game made a bigger deal about the romance between the Arisen and their Beloved throughout the game. That might just be a problem with the length though. God damn it, why do I keep saying such familiar shit like that? It's humiliating. I'm almost certain that if there's a Beloved system in the sequel, it will be pulled off much better than in the original. As it stands, the story doesn't last long enough for me to become truly invested in the characters to the point that I'm genuinely upset when they are forced to become part of the Dragon's bargain. And although shorter games are able to make me more invested in the characters, like in Undertale, that's mostly because games like Undertale spend a higher proportion of the game's runtime fleshing out those characters and emotionally connecting them to the player. And like in Undertale, it's when the game attaches the characters to the mechanics at the forefront of the gameplay that I become most emotionally invested. To anyone who's played Undertale, you'll know exactly why I cried when I saw one of the first attacks used by the boss that uses this song. But yeah, I felt able to read deeper into what pawns might represent because of their role in the game as an interactive medium. If there was a similar character type in a parallel TV show, I haven't seen the Dragon's Dogma Netflix show so I can't say how the pawns are done in that, it wouldn't be the same because you need them to be part of your party, helping on your journey. That's what separates good video game storytelling from every other medium. Interactivity.